What is permaculture and what does it look like in a refugee camp? I'm Kath Sheldrick from Living Lightly Worldwide, and this is a group of women in Jerash Camp in Jordan discussing herbs, planting, and how to make use of what they already have. And this is where the work begins, not with resources, but with thinking differently. Permaculture is a way of thinking and working with nature, not against it, which supports long-term resilience. And that's what the work explores, shifting from aid to regeneration. What I'm sharing comes from Jerash Camp, where I've been working with long-term refugees, but it didn't start there. The question I get asked most often about this project is how did I, a crofter and permaculture practitioner from the west coast of Scotland, find myself in a refugee camp in Jordan? To explain that, I need to begin with a story about an outdoor classroom in the Indus Valley, where I was working with women smallholders and agricultural workers who were at risk of being displaced by flooding. The women came from two different villages, one Hindu, one Muslim, but none had received any formal education. Local project partners worked closely with the women, using sticks and stones, drawing in the sand, storytelling and songs, to help explain the principles of permaculture design. And because embroidery was already part of their daily life, we commissioned panels showing the lessons the women had learnt, soils, diversity, zones, and designs for their own homes. Later that year, at a permaculture teacher training course in Barcelona, which focused on teaching in refugee camps, I was asked to share my experiences of informal classroom settings and working without the usual whiteboards, pens, papers, etc. I showed pictures of the embroideries, which resonated particularly with one of the delegates, a Palestinian living in Jordan, as embroidery, tatriz, is very much a part of Palestinian culture. In permaculture, we often talk about mycelial networks, how connections spread quietly beneath the surface. I'm based in Argyll in Scotland. The embroidery panels were created in Sindh in Pakistan. I later showed that work in Barcelona, Spain, and that conversation led to Jerash in Jordan. Just shows how interconnected everything is and how ideas travel through people. I arrived in Jerash with curiosity rather than a fixed plan, but with the knowledge that permaculture can be applied in any context or climate, and plenty of experience to prove it. So the first step was simply to understand how people were already living, working, and making decisions within that environment. Alongside other permaculture practitioners from the teacher training course and a local community grassroots organisation, we discussed how permaculture thinking and practice could best be brought to the camp. This collaboration was essential in shaping how the work unfolded. Jerash Camp is home to more than 30,000 people, most of them Palestinian refugees displaced from Gaza. Like many long-established camps, it's developed into a dense urban community with limited infrastructure and very few opportunities for formal employment, as the camp residents are unable to secure Jordanian nationality or work permits. But despite the hardships, what was noticeable was the strength of relationships and community life. During the first year, we focused on introducing permaculture thinking and principles, both within the classroom and through practical hands-on learning, looking particularly at the patterns of nature and what outdoor space was available to us at the community centre. We regularly went outside to observe the space. Here we were, noticing how the sun moved across the playground, how light and shade changed throughout the day. We also spent time looking at recycling and repurposing materials, making use of what was available rather than relying on new inputs, and generally observing what resources could be harnessed relatively easily and cheaply. By the second year, that thinking was visible, not just in the garden, but in how materials and spaces were being used more creatively. The women worked together in small groups to redesign the community garden, building on what was already there, mostly the existing lemon trees. They had loads of good ideas and plenty of enthusiasm. And together we refined the ideas to fit the realities of the space. These ideas weren't just discussed, they were actually implemented. We introduced herbs and other useful plants for guilds, and I was able to leave money to pay for trellising and fencing, and for a rainwater harvesting system, both of which were installed after I'd left. Even those small changes made a real difference. By the time of my second visit, the passion fruit vine had reached the trellis and was creating shade. Herbs were being harvested for use in the kitchen, and the rainwater tank was full. In the second year, the focus shifted beyond the physical space and into social permaculture and regenerative enterprise. So this was less about gardens and more about how people think, relate, and make decisions within their own context. And this is where the work really began to deepen. One of the most important things we worked with was a simple decision-making framework I use called Orla, looking at objectives, resources, and limitations before deciding what to do through analysis. What was striking was just how many skills and non-physical resources they already had. And just as importantly, they started to distinguish between real limitations and perceived ones. That shift in awareness gave a genuine sense of agency. The women worked in groups, exploring and refining various enterprise ideas that might generate income for them. Instead of focusing on what wasn't possible, the conversation began to move towards what was. It took some time, but finally we noticed a change in the room, a growing sense of confidence, possibility, and hope. What emerged wasn't just enterprise ideas. It was confidence, collaboration, and a shift in how the women saw what was possible. Permaculture isn't just about land, it's about people and the decisions they make. When I was there in February, a young student nurse whom I knew from the first year had had to stop her studies because she couldn't afford to continue. As refugees, they're treated as international students, so the fees are much higher than for Jordanians. So I set up a small healthcare scholarship to support her, and she's now continuing her training. She's also volunteering at the community centre and learning about planting and therapeutic herbs. Jerash Camp isn't isolated, it's connected to other refugee camps, and some of the women were already sharing embroidery skills with people from the Syrian camp. Having identified some enthusiastic local permaculture facilitators, I'm beginning to develop simple, accessible resources that can be translated, shared, and adapted by the local people themselves. Hopefully, these ideas will myceliate. Alongside this, I'm continuing to develop resources, books, audio, and learning materials that allow people to engage at different levels wherever they are. For me, this is what permaculture looks like in practice. Small shifts in awareness, leading to different decisions over time, in any context or climate. Regeneration, like relationships, takes time. All the work I've shared is ongoing. If you'd like to stay connected or support the work, the links are here.